Hey everybody, welcome back to another comic review, and this time we're talking about the New Teen Titans Volume 2. Let me preface this by saying I have a lot to talk about. There is many ideas crammed into this one collection of issues, so we will go ahead and try to get into it as quickly as possible. So this volume goes through issues 9 through 16. All of these volumes, as far as I can tell, I have the first 4 at the time of this recording. By the time you guys see this, the 5th one will probably be out. All of the volumes I have listed as collecting 8 issues as a piece, and I don't know when they're going to stop printing these, because Marv Wolfman wrote Teen Titans for somewhere around the ballpark of 200, 250 issues. But George Perez left well before that. And these trades are listed as George Perez and Marv Wolfman. So I don't know if they're planning to stop after Perez leaves and not collect the rest, or if they're trying to go and try and collect all of Wolfman's run. And if that's the case, if they are going to go and try and collect all of Wolfman's run, and we have to wait 3 months to get 8 issues at a time, it's going to take forever to get the rest of this. It's going to be like Hulk Visionaries, Peter David, where you're waiting like a year before you have like a third of the run. We'll see how that goes, because I want the entire Wolfman collection in trade, because I've read it all before, I have the issues, but it's better to have it in this kind of format. So this is issues 9 through 16. All the volumes have an introduction by Marv Wolfman where he talks about it in more broad sense. And those are really interesting. I recommend reading through those because he's got an interesting perspective on this. The introduction for this version was written in 2004, and he goes into detail about how this book sold and what the thought process behind it was at the time with DC and Marvel. At that point at Marvel and DC, if you started a new book and it didn't start selling right away, then chances are you were going to get canceled 2-3 issues in. And Wolfman has this very good section where he's talking about how it takes time for a book to find its audience. The first issue of New Teen Titans sold through the roof. Second issue didn't do well. Third issue did worse. Fourth issue did even worse. 5 was non-existent. And then suddenly with issue 6 it went back to being top of the sales charts. And he talks about how a thing like this, something that's trying to reinvent the wheel, something that isn't immediately appealing to your usual demographic, it takes time to sit in the public consciousness and grow and become a bit of an acquired taste. If you're just reading comics in the late 70s and you're used to stuff like Michelini and Layton's Iron Man, which I love, by the way, but you might not necessarily like what Wolfman's been doing on Teen Titans. It's a different flavor. It's a different kind of storytelling. This is teen angst before teen angst TV shows became popular. And so at the time when they were pitching this book, Perez originally signed on to do the book because he figured it would give him a chance to practice a little bit, and he'd be off the book after like 2 or 3 issues because it got canceled. Because that's just the way they were operating. And Wolfman talks a lot about how DC was unwilling to take risks, and they don't realize that sometimes the sales don't matter. Sometimes it's about just putting a book out because you know there's someone in this world that needs to read it, and eventually when it gets to them it'll pay off, and that's all that should matter. What should matter is proliferating the art before the profit. And it's some good stuff. It's interesting, and the fact that it took so long for this book to sell and that it still kept going regardless of that, I think is exceptionally lucky, and I like that Wolfman respects that. And he published this. He wrote that in 2004, but it's even more prevalent now when you look at the way DC's been running their business. They've changed recently, but when you look at the way the New 52's been doing things, the way Marvel has been doing things for the longest time, when Marvel went bankrupt and all of that, you really have to put the creators first, you really have to put the characters first, you have to put the storytelling first, and a lot of times it's not going to work out as amazingly as this, but sometimes important stories just have to be told. So Wolfman's very humble about all of that, and I enjoy reading his perspective there. On to the actual story. So there's about 3 story arcs here. The first one's a Changeling Deathstroke story, kind of. Then there's a story called Clash of the Titans, where you deal with the ancient Greek Titans. And then there's a Doom Patrol story somewhere towards the end here, which takes about 2 or 3 issues. The team actually splits up into 2 for those last 2 arcs, and we'll talk about how that's structured. The best way I can talk about this collection and all of the themes, all of the ideas, is to simply just kind of summarize and talk about it in small intervals. So this first story opens with the Puppeteer, who we see at the end of the previous volume. He was a Green Lantern villain. Apparently Wolfman's got some kind of fascination with like one-and-done villains from original comic book runs. There's a character here that you haven't seen since Wonder Woman #1. There's a character here you haven't seen since Green Lantern #1. There are references to things that you haven't read since like 1940 and 50. So Wolfman's got like it really enjoys that kind of nostalgia. And it's a fun story. It's nothing great. The Puppeteer stuff doesn't really matter in the grand scheme. He's just kind of a throwaway villain to reintroduce Hive and reintroduce a plot point called Project Prometheum. Project Prometheum is essentially this regenerative sort of device where you can regrow organs, regrow limbs, but also you can constantly regenerate energy. So instead of a bomb blowing up and expelling all of its energy in an instant, the energy keeps compounding and it keeps going constantly, and you can use that as a renewable resource, or you can use it as obviously one of the most destructive bombs the world has ever known. And of course, Cold War mindset, arms race, all that, going to be used for the wrong reasons. So it's been locked away, and the board members of Changeling's company are getting killed off one by one so Hive can get Project Prometheum. The fact that it's an allusion to Prometheus is spelled out a little bit in this, and the whole idea of the Greek gods and their mythology I'll talk about a little bit later, because there's an entire arc about that with Clash of the Titans. So Hive wants to get their hands on it. The Titans stop the Puppeteer, but eventually Deathstroke the Terminator shows up and he steals it instead. Now, Deathstroke the Terminator, in the previous volume, we got his son Grant Wilson, who hates the Titans. And he goes to Hive and he gets the same procedure that gives Deathstroke his powers, and they kind of mess with it so he doesn't have the same kind of he doesn't have the same sort of metabolism. His body doesn't have the energy to maintain what he's doing. And so in his fight with the Titans, he ends up dying. And through that, Deathstroke decides to take the contract to kill the Teen Titans. But through that, he also acknowledges that I'm killing them because through them, my son went off the deep end. At the same time, I know it's Hive's fault that this happened in the first place, so I'm going to go after them as well. So Project Prometheum is his way of doing that. So he steals Project Prometheum, and he's going to have an auction about it. Before we get to that, this is still the first issue, by the way. So before we get to that, we'll talk about some of the stuff with Cyborg here, because the Cyborg-Beast Boy relationship is set up immediately, and I want to make sure we have that going forward before I mention anything else that's important, because this is massively important to the Doom Patrol stuff as well. Okay, so Changeling and Cyborg have an interesting relationship in that they're total opposites. We talked about the kind of triangular relationship that each of these character sets have, and Beast Boy or Changeling. I keep calling him Beast Boy because I'm used to him that way. But Cyborg and Changeling are on two opposite ends that are grounded by Robin in the middle. So bringing those two characters together is immediately interesting, and basically what happens here is we have a great story where Cyborg is now helping this character named Sarah that runs a school for children that have prosthetics or are disabled in some way or another, and she's trying to help them get out in the world again, be more confident, and Cyborg's there as the ultimate metaphor for prosthetics to try and encourage them. And in the opening of this, he brings Raven along with him, so one of the little girls there who has a broken arm or has a lost arm asks Raven to heal her. And Raven says that that's a miracle and she can't do it. And the reason Cyborg brings her there is not to try and heal these kids, but to try and cement into them that these superheroes are not gods. Superheroes aren't these mythical beings that you can worship and anything your heart desires will come true. It's not about that. There are people doing their best. and you can't hold on to some false hope that at the end of the day everything is going to be better. You have to keep facing every challenge and getting back up. You have to be able to deal with the problems life dealt to you and move forward. These little kids that have these prosthetic arms, they can't hold out hope for the rest of their life that someday someone like Superman will show up and give them their real limbs back. They have to learn to live with it and identify themselves by what they can do and not what they can't. And they have to get over the anger that they feel the way Cyborg did in the first arc. And it's a really good, really touching story. And he explains this to Raven as that was his plan all along, and she credits him as being a little bit more emotional than he's ever let on before. And it's a good moment. Now you combine this with the stuff with Beast Boy, because Beast Boy has Changeling. I keep calling him Beast Boy. His name is Changeling. Changeling runs a company from his stepfather. Changeling's whole thing is that his parents died, then his adopted parents died, and one of them left him, and now he's just there by himself running a company that he doesn't want to run, and he looks like a freak because he's green, and so he uses jokes as a defense mechanism. So him and Cyborg start bonding, and they get a little bit of a relationship because they're both outsiders. They're both people that lost their families, but they're also both people that are trying to get over their anger. And Cyborg successfully done that, and Changeling is trying to get there. And there's some great moments between those two characters where both of them have such a profound disconnect from life, and they both put on personas to try and make everyone brush them off. And both of those characters see through each other, and through that they bond. And they become friends, and they really start to care about each other. It's a good relationship. So all of that being set up, we move on to the Deathstroke stuff. Deathstroke kidnaps Sarah, and he says the Titans need to be on this island so he can demonstrate Project Prometheum as a bomb and sell it to the highest bidder. Titans obviously escape. The auction was just a setup so he could take out Hive. He takes out a couple of people from Hive, he gets a whole bunch of money, he escapes, and the Titans survive. So it's sort of a win-loss situation, it's sort of a tie. But in the middle of that fight, we start the Changeling-Deathstroke relationship, which we'll talk more about when we get to Terra Incognito and Judas Contract and all that. The Changeling-Deathstroke relationship is really fascinating. I won't mention it too much here. Basically what happens is, in the middle of Deathstroke's escape, he fires a gun at Changeling, and Changeling is about to die. From there, the Titans decide to split up. Because Changeling has been, over the course of his time as head of a company, he's been funneling money to Robot Man of the Doom Patrol to try and find his stepfather. His stepfather, who was a member of the Doom Patrol, is going after the people that killed the original Doom Patrol and killed Beast Boy's stepmother. And so Changeling is funneling cash to them, and while Changeling is holding on to his life, Robin, Cyborg, and Kid Flash decide that they're going to go and try and find Robot Man and figure out what happened to the Doom Patrol, or at least get justice for what happened to them. And while they're doing that, Donna Troy and Starfire decide that they're going to go to Themyscira and Raven as well. Go to Themyscira and have one of Donna's sisters heal Changeling. Now, when they get there, the mythological Titans, the gods above the gods in Greek mythology, as they refer to themselves here, break out, and that's never explained. There's just one token scene where Hyperion breaks out of his rock formation, and I don't know why. It just seems to happen for some reason. But it just happens, and Hyperion breaks out, and he confronts Donna Troy, and Donna Troy gets enraptured with him. There's basically a magic spell kind of thing. And because she's mortal and he's a god, he's able to have power over her and make her love him. And so Donna Troy and Hyperion go down to Tartarus, and they free the rest of the mythological Titans. I keep saying mythological Titans because I don't want to confuse everyone with Teen Titans, but in the context of this universe, they're not really mythological. So I know it sounds dumb, but bear with me. It's the best I can do to explain everything. So they free the Greek Titans, I guess I could say that. They free the Greek Titans, and the Greek Titans want to go into Olympus and take out the gods. Essentially what this becomes is the ultimate metaphor for young versus old. because the Titans, the Greek Titans, rose up and defeated their father Uranus and took over. And then the Titans themselves, led by Kronos, were defeated by Zeus, who were their children. And so the whole idea here is that preceding generations always supplant the previous generation. The idea is always that when someone has a child, they die. They don't die in the sense that they stop being, but their life's purpose changes. That whoever you are, whoever you were, whatever you do in life, at some point, if you have a child, the child takes over your existence. And for some people that's a gift, for other people it's not. And there's always going to be conflict there because children will either have a natural need to rebel or they'll be so close to home and you want them to branch out. Children always have to escape the shadow of their parents or at least be something else from their parents by their very nature. And so the book is trying to examine that as a conflict. And so the Greek Titans are trying to get revenge on their children, and their children, who are the current pantheon of Greek gods, want to stop them. And there is obviously a good versus evil thing there, but it's more complicated than that because it's about survival. It's about Kronos getting rid of his children slowly because he thinks they're going to kill him. Doesn't make either one of them what either one of them are doing is right, but again, it's more of a metaphor than it is literal. So while that's going on, Donna Troy is under the thrall of Hyperion, and we deal again with what happened in the first volume, because in the first volume we found out that Raven used her powers to make Kid Flash believe that he loved her. And she did that because she needed the Teen Titans. And ever since then, the Kid Flash and Raven have had a strained relationship. And Kid Flash doesn't really know what he believes. And so we tackle that again here with Donna Troy being under the control of Hyperion. And along with that, we deal with this idea of mortality. And we go back to what the superheroes represented earlier with what Cyborg did with the children at the school. The idea that superheroes exist on a plane that's above normal human beings, but at the same time they aren't immortal. Superman can die, Batman can die. They have both died historically. Donna Troy can die. Everyone on the Titans, regardless of their abilities or lack of abilities, can eventually die. But the people don't see them that way, and because they don't, and because there is, no matter how you slice it, a disconnect between the people with power and the people without, they have this mentality of they're going to always be okay. And Donna Troy being controlled by Hyperion, and Kid Flash being controlled by Raven, and Beast in a Changeling losing his stepmother and losing his stepfather, and Cyborg losing half of his body. All these characters start to realize that most of their emotional issues come from this idea of power and mortality. And they're dealing with that very head-on here. And some scenes it's really spelled out. There is a scene here where Raven just exposits everything we're supposed to take away from these metaphors. That's not great. It's worse in modern comics when that sort of writing style has phased out. I'm more okay with it in 80s stuff just because that's the way it was written, that's the historical context. But it does take you out of the story when you have all of these ideas building in your mind and then the book just tells you them. That's a little bit annoying, but regardless, it's not too much of the book, so I guess it's not that big of an issue. So you have those mortality themes, you have the young versus old themes, and you have that idea of eternal recurrence, and that these cycles are going to constantly keep going, and you have to be at peace with them. And interestingly, in true Amazonian style, the conflict is resolved through peace. The gods are about to come to blows, but then they talk it out, and there is peace between them. And the Greek Titans decide that they're going to go down to Tartarus and reshape it and make it their new home. It's resolved through peace, and that's fantastic, especially considering the story is called Clash of the Titans. Comic books, no matter what, have to have some action in there somewhere. We have so many bad superhero stories about might makes right. The fact that I was able to read this and see a story where the conflict was resolved by talking to each other is just absolutely refreshing. I've almost never seen that in a mainstream superhero comic. The only other time I can think of is an issue of Starman where that happens. it's kind of remarkable, and it's handled really well, and it's a good emotional scene when Kronos and his Titans are talking to Zeus and his gods, and they're discussing the fact that they don't want to hate each other, and they don't know why they hate each other, and how much of this is just the way the universe is structured, that it's just the chaos of the world that's forcing them to be like this. And they decide to go their separate ways, and it's all okay by the end. And I really like that. And it's not like everyone's happy ending kind of thing. It's more of just a moment of clarity. In the middle of this, Donna Troy does admit that she doesn't love Hyperion, and it was under a spell, and she breaks free, and she goes through a pretty substantial emotional arc that we'll pick up more on with Volume 3. But she already has a boyfriend, someone that she later marries, named Terry Long. And she goes back to him, and she feels violated as she would. My issue with this, though, my problem with it is that Donna Troy is the only character in these first 16 issues to not get any sort of emotional journey or character arc. Donna Troy is basically a plot device for this whole run, not for this whole run, but like for these first 16 issues. And yeah, she gets her moment after this. She gets her moment after being mentally violated by Hyperion, but we don't sympathize with her or understand her or get inside of her head before that happens, and I do think that's a problem. I think that she's one of the only characters that feels two-dimensional before this happens to her. And I'm not saying like every character needs to have an issue, but even Robin, who hasn't been the focus of any of these issues, has emotional complexities that we've talked about directly, and Donna Troy still hasn't done that. And that's irritating. And we will get more of that later, but again, I still think that that's a problem right now. So after Clash of the Titans, we cut back to the other half team, because Clash of the Titans is between Raven, Starfire, Donna Troy, the Amazons, and the Greek Titans. While they're doing that, and while Changeling is recovering at Themyscira with one of Donna Troy's sisters, Robin, Cyborg, and Kid Flash go off to find Robot Man, who's trying to find Steve Dayton, who's trying to find the people that killed the Doom Patrol. And there we have an interesting story about family relationships. We have an interesting story about the sort of ins and outs of that dynamic. That the greatest thing about having a family is that there are people you love unconditionally. They are people that are always part of you. That there are people that will always know you better than anyone else. And there's a different kind of honesty to being with them. At the same time, the horrible thing about being a family is that they're the people that are capable of hurting you the most, and it doesn't have to be directly, it can just be implicitly. And so you open yourself up to great joy and great vulnerability by caring about people to that degree. And someone like Changeling, who's younger and has so much hate and resentment in him because of how many families have died on him, is nothing but angry with Steve Dayton, and he's nothing but angry with the Doom Patrol, and he's trying his hardest to get over it, but he's really just avoiding the issue. And so, to help give him closure, the rest of the team is trying to go out and find the killers of the Doom Patrol, and through there we kind of bridge the gap that all of these characters have, and we start to really make them a family. We start to make it so that the Teen Titans become the home that all of these characters have been craving since the beginning. And to do that through Changeling's literal family, I think, is genius. The Doom Patrol story is easily the weakest, mostly because it's really padded. The stuff between Robot Man and Cyborg is interesting because they're both machines, and Cyborg gets a bit of perspective knowing that he's not as worse off as Robot Man. The stuff between Changeling and his father Steve Dayton, or stepfather Steve Dayton, is fantastic. You get a really great emotional scene where he lets go of the anger and he finally calls him Dad, and it's fantastic. You get a good recap of Doom Patrol history and how Steve Dayton fits into that mythology, and the sort of impossible choices that they were into, and the idea that they were called freaks, and that the Teen Titans are kind of the spiritual successors to the idea of the Doom Patrol, because they are the outcasts again, and they see themselves that way, and this reinvention of the characters is much more in line with that version. And all that stuff's really good. The actual plan that Madame Rouge and one of the general characters, I forget his name, have is kind of dumb. Doesn't really mean anything. the stuff with the, what are they called? The Legion of Doom? Not the Legion of Doom. I forget. Let me actually flip through the book and see if I can find them. The stuff with the Brotherhood of Evil, yeah, where they show back up and decide to save the day with Changeling and the Titans because the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. That's really weak. None of those characters are given great characterization. Everything kind of resolves itself in just one kind of action brawl, and considering how emotionally heavy this book is, and given that fantastic moment where the Greek Titans were able to resolve things through peace, I feel like the book maybe earns that final arc being mostly action. At the same time, it's not something you're sort of ready for yet. Given the tone established with those previous issues, it just feels like it comes out of nowhere. I also can't help but think that there's a weird gender commentary there, where like the women are able to resolve things through peace. And especially when you look at the Amazons and their discussion of man's world versus their world. And then the story dealing with most of the male characters ends in lots of action and destruction. And given that Wolfman talks about the dynamics of the females and the males separately, maybe that's on purpose. I don't know. I'd have to think more about it and see what it goes on, if it goes on as a motif later. I also think that the two sides, the female characters and the male characters, how they have their triangles, there are middle grounds between them. Like Donna Troy and Dick Grayson are the best of friends, and they share more commonalities with each other than anyone else. Starfire's sort of emotional anger spouts reflect a lot of what Cyborg's gone through. Raven and Changeling have a lot in common. Kid Flash is sort of the ultimate middle ground behind all of these characters and bouncing between what his identity is and isn't. None of that's really being addressed head on, though, and I wonder if that gets fixed later, because I don't remember it being a focus of the book going forward. I always kind of remembered it as two separate groups. But considering that they are a family, they should be meeting in the middle somewhere, and some of that happens a little bit more towards the end. The final issue is kind of a day in the life issue, just like the end of the last one. And it's good. It's interesting stuff. Basically, what we do here is we give Starfire a boyfriend. And Starfire is all about emotion. Starfire is all about embracing emotion. We actually open this book with Donna Troy talking about how she loves her boyfriend, and Starfire has been really flirty, and she's been trying to go out with Robin, but Robin says that it just wouldn't work on the team, and the dynamic would be ruined, and it's dangerous to do that. And so she's looking for an emotional attachment. She is a purely emotional creature, and again, in contrast to someone like Raven, in contrast to someone like Donna Troy, she is a being that is told that their existence comes through their passions. And to not have someone to latch onto makes it so that she latches onto her new boyfriend extremely quickly. And that's addressed and that's talked about. It's really well done. The boyfriend turns out to be a plant from Hive, but he slowly starts to fall for her, and so Hive kills him, and Starfire goes off the deep end. And since the beginning of this, we've been building the fact that Starfire's emotions and her passion and the fact that her powers are derived from that feeling makes her more violent. That it makes her more prone to be more lethal without thinking about it, because it is about the thrill of the moment. It's about the experience. And so the Titans have been worrying about that, and so having a point where someone she loves dies drives her into wanting to kill the Hive. And the book has a really great ethical argument about that, and they say that that we understand what you're going through, but what you're after is revenge. It's not justice, and it's not the stereotypical differentiation between the two. It's about the fact that for us, for the Titans, Starfire is part of our family, and the fact that she is feeling this way has to be dealt with directly. It can't be deflected by hurting other people. And so she should talk to us, we should talk to her, and we should help her get through this, considering how emotional she is. And it's about that kind of human connectivity before it's about moral platitudes. And I really like that. I love the way all of that's handled. There is more of that to come in the next volume. I like how all of that's done. I think it's really good stuff, and I like the conflict between the Titans and Starfire when that happens, and that they really feel like a family having an argument. They really feel like a group of kids is trying to save their sister. And a lot of that works really well with the parallels to Themyscira and the fact that everyone's kind of family there as well, and that the Titans are getting more enlightened through that experience. I think all that's really good stuff. The only other thing I'll mention here, at least I think that's everything I wanted to cover, the only other thing I'll mention here is my only other criticism, which is George Perez. George Perez is the artist that everyone goes to as, well, he can draw anybody. He's the guy that is famous for being able to draw tons and tons of characters in one scene. He's got a fantastic legacy, and I like George Perez art. My problem with his art, though, is, yes, he can draw a ton of people in one scene. The problem is they all look the same. Maybe that's just me. Maybe it's as a guy that does draw and has studied art and knows the ins and outs of comic book drawing, but when I look at giant group shots of the Amazons versus the Greek Titans, and I look at all the male characters and all the female characters, almost all of them have the same face, almost all of them have the same body structure, they just vary in size, and they just vary in clothing. All of the color tones are about the same. There's very little like artistic differentiation between people, and I recognize that drawing a ton of people in one scene is really hard. And when you do that, you will start to kind of draw everyone the same. I've been known to do this in some of my group shots, but it takes you out of the experience a little bit more when the book tries to utilize that as if it's a selling point. The book clearly thinks George Perez is amazing at this, and so it takes every opportunity it can to get a bunch of people into one scene, and it doesn't always look great. It looks great with the Titans because he's had practice drawing them individually, and they are more defined character models than other characters. But when you have all those giant massive fight scenes with the Doom Patrol story and with the Greek God story, it just doesn't look anywhere near as good as it could. Kurt Swan drew an issue in the previous volume. I think it was Kurt Swan. And I think his group shots actually look a little bit better than George Perez. Maybe those are fighting words. Maybe I'm one of the few people who's not crazy about George Perez artwork. But I don't really think it works. The thing that saves it for me is mostly the coloring. The coloring and the inking is, I think, where it feels strongest as opposed to just the straight pencils. Final note is there's actually a couple of spelling errors in this and typos. And that's really minor, but I just wanted to mention it because it's kind of rare when I read a comic from the Big Two that has any sort of editorial error of that degree. But it's kind of funny. And I had to actually stop and reread a couple sentences twice just to make sure that I wasn't misreading it. But no, there were actually a couple of typos here and there. And you'd think with these reprints they would fix that, but I guess not. Overall, this is an incredible volume. It has a couple more issues than it has a couple more problems than the first volume did. But thematically, what it's doing is just so much grander and so much more interesting and so much more emotional that I really love it. This is the volume that made me fall in love with these characters. This is the volume that made me say, "Yeah, I'm a Teen Titans fan." And I was never comfortable with that statement until I went through this stack of issues. So if you liked the first volume, definitely keep going. If you didn't like the first volume, I'd say give the second one a shot. I'd say go through and read the second one, have those first 16 issues in your mind together, and if you don't love the Titans by then maybe they're just not your characters. But I love everything that's handled here. I think it's an absolutely fantastic collection. DC, again, is reprinting these so you can get them, and they're relatively cheap. I said this in the previous video. I think this is a better format than Omnibus, but I guess that's really up to you and how you read and what kind of system you have for that. But this is great, and thanks everybody for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with anything I said. If you're a Teen Titans fan, if you have a favorite run, if you have a favorite member of the team, you know me. My favorite member is always going to be Robin because I'm a Batman guy. But leave all that in the comments. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time with another review.